The chandeliers blazed above the grand hall like captured stars, their light spilling across marble floors so polished they mirrored the gowns of 100 noble women. Candles dripped wax down iron sconces, casting amber warmth over a room that smelled of roasted boar, honeyed wine, and the particular kind of cruelty that hides beneath laughter. Seraphine moved along the far wall with a tray balanced in both hands, her worn shoes silent against the stone, her gray servant's dress the color of ash. She was invisible here. She had learned to be. The mating ball of the Iron Throne was held once every decade, when the Alpha King was obligated by ancient law to take a mate and name a Luna. Every Alpha family in the 9 packs had sent their most powerful daughters. They stood in clusters near the dais, their gowns worth more than Seraphine's entire life, their wolves humming with anticipation. She could feel the energy of them, restless, competitive, bright with ambition. She felt none of those things. She felt only the weight of the tray and the familiar ache behind her ribs where hunger lived. She had not eaten since yesterday's morning ration. Her aunt had reduced her portions again. It was a small cruelty among many, the kind that left no mark visible to the court. Seraphine had stopped expecting anything different. She was 17 years in the service of House Vane, 17 years of being reminded that she was wolfless, rankless, a charity case kept alive by the reluctant mercy of a woman who despised her. She did not know why Mira Vane despised her so thoroughly. She had stopped asking. The tray trembled. Her arms shook with the effort of holding it level. She breathed in slowly through her nose, counted to 3, breathed out. She needed to make it to the east table and back before Lady Vane noticed her absence from the kitchen corridor. She needed to not be seen. She was not that fortunate. "Wolfless girl." The voice came from her left. Lady Cressida Thorne, eldest daughter of the Northern Pack Alpha, smiled at her with all her teeth and none of her warmth. She was beautiful in the way expensive weapons are beautiful, precisely and lethally. "You are blocking my view of the dais." "Forgive me, my lady." Seraphine stepped aside. The tray tilted, a crystal goblet slid. She caught it, barely, and the wine sloshed across her wrist, ruby red against pale skin. The laughter was immediate, not cruel enough to draw attention, not gentle enough to be mistaken for kindness. The practiced laughter of women who understood the social utility of small humiliations. "Careful," Cressida said, still smiling. "The Alpha King sees everything in this hall. You would not want him to notice the help making a mess at his own celebration." "I would not," Seraphine agreed and moved on. She felt the heat of their amusement at her back and kept her spine straight. This was the art she had perfected, absorbing shame without bending beneath it. She reached the east table, unloaded the tray with practiced efficiency, turned to go, and stopped. He was there. At the far end of the hall, on the iron dais, seated in a throne carved from a single piece of black rock hauled from the northern mountains 200 years ago. She had never seen him before tonight. She had only heard the name spoken in the hushed, slightly terrified tones reserved for the very powerful. Kael Dravenmore, Alpha King of the Iron Throne, High Lycan, ruler of the 9 packs. He was speaking to no one. He sat with one arm resting on the throne's carved edge, a goblet loose in his fingers, his dark eyes moving across the room with the slow, assessing patience of a predator who had nothing to prove. He was not old. She realized, younger than she had imagined, perhaps 30, with the kind of face that looked as though it had been designed to intimidate. Sharp jaw, dark brow, a scar along the left side of his neck, running from below his ear toward his collarbone, pale against bronze skin. His shoulders were broad under black ceremonial armor that caught the candlelight and refused to give it back. He was not beautiful the way the noble lords were beautiful. He was something else entirely. Something that made her instincts press against her ribs in a way she did not have words for. She looked away immediately. She turned toward the servants' corridor. She made herself walk at the same pace, the same invisible shuffle, the same nobody is here movement that had kept her safe for years. She did not notice that his eyes had followed her across the room. She did not see them stop when she did. She did not see his hand tighten on the goblet, or his jaw set in a way that his attendants recognized with unease. She did not see any of it. She was already through the corridor door and into the dark. The kitchens were chaos. Seraphine moved through them without speaking, returning her tray to the rack, taking up a fresh one, filling it with the next round of goblets. Around her, servants called to one another. The head cook bellowed. Steam rose from iron pots and great white curtains. She liked the kitchen noise. It asked nothing of her. "You look pale." The voice came from her right elbow. She turned to find Nessa, short, copper-haired, with flour still across her cheek, watching her with the particular worried expression she reserved for Seraphine alone. Nessa was kitchen staff, born into service same as Seraphine, 2 years younger, twice as loud, and the closest thing to a friend the world had ever offered her. "Did something happen out there?" "Nothing I cannot manage." "That is not an answer." "It is the only answer I have." Seraphine lifted the fresh tray and paused. The world tilted slightly. She put one hand on the counter. "Seraphine." Nessa's voice dropped. "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday." "Which meal?" "Morning." Nessa's expression darkened in a way that had nothing to do with fury and everything to do with the helpless grief of someone who cares about a person they cannot protect. She pressed a bread roll into Seraphine's free hand, secreted from somewhere in her apron, warm, stolen from the noble's table. Seraphine looked at it for a moment, then ate it in 3 quick bites, not allowing herself to taste it. Survival was not the same as pleasure. She had long since stopped confusing the two. "Lady Vane, cut your rations again," Nessa said. It was not a question. She did. "One day, someone will ask why." "No one will ask why," Seraphine said, and returned to the hall. The night wore on. She moved, she served, she disappeared. The noble daughters preened near the dais, vying for the Alpha King's gaze by turns subtle and transparent. She watched them between tasks, not with envy exactly, but with the particular attention of someone cataloging a world they are barred from entering. Cressida Thorne laughed too loudly at something her companion said, positioned perfectly so the sound would carry to the throne. A Vespari girl in silver damask executed a curtsy near the dais steps with the precision of a woman who had practiced it 1,000 times. 3 daughters of the Eastern Council had coordinated their gowns in the Alpha King's colors, black and deep gold, a subtlety everyone noticed and no one acknowledged. And through all of it, Seraphine moved in gray. She was carrying a nearly empty tray back toward the corridor when her vision blurred at the edges. She stopped, breathed. The blur did not clear. The bread roll had not been enough. The hours on her feet had been too many. The ache behind her ribs had graduated from hunger to something more serious, and she recognized it with a kind of distant, detached clarity. Her body was beginning to fail beneath her, and it had chosen to do so here, in the middle of the Alpha King's mating ball, surrounded by 800 wolves who would not spare her a glance. She made it to the corridor doorway. She did not make it through it. Her knees folded. The tray slipped. The remaining goblets struck marble with a sound that rang through the nearest quarter of the hall like a bell. She caught herself against the doorframe. Barely. She was on one knee, head bowed, the edges of her vision swimming in black and gold. And she was aware with sharp humiliation that people had turned to look. Not many, but some. The nearest servants moved toward her with expressions of professional alarm. Nessa was not in the room. Lady Vane was not in the room. She was going to be dismissed. She was going to be dismissed tonight, in front of the court, and she had nowhere to go, and she could not stand up. She pressed her palm flat against the marble and pushed. A hand closed around her arm. Not roughly, with the kind of force that does not ask permission but takes care regardless. The hand of someone accustomed to steadying things much larger than her. She looked up. The Alpha King was there. He had left the dais. He was crouched at her level, which seemed impossible given who he was, and his hand was around her arm, and his eyes were fixed on her face with an expression she could not read. Not pity, not irritation, not the blank dismissal she was accustomed to. Something else. Something that looked almost like concentration, as though he was working very hard to understand something that did not make sense to him. She felt it then. The heat. It came from where his hand held her arm, spreading up through her shoulder and into her chest, like sunlight moving through cold stone. Slow, pervasive, total. She had never felt anything like it. She did not know what it was. She knew only that every part of her that had been frozen for years seemed to lean toward it without her permission, drawn by a gravity that preceded thought. "Can you stand?" His voice was low. It carried no further than her ears. "Yes," she said. It was partly true. He did not let go of her arm. He rose, and she rose with him, and the heat remained, even when she was upright, even when she pulled her arm back with as much dignity as the moment could hold. He was taller than she had understood from across the room. He blocked the candlelight. "You have not eaten," he said. It was not a question. He could smell it, she realized. He was a lichen king. He could smell everything. "I am well, my king." She kept her eyes down. It was safest. "You are not." He studied her with that same concentrated expression. Then he turned to the nearest attendant, a young man who had materialized at his shoulder with the speed of someone who knew they should have prevented this moment, and said, with quiet, absolute authority, "Have food sent to the servants' wing. A full meal, tonight." The attendant moved immediately. The Alpha King looked at her once more. His expression had not softened exactly, but there was something in it. A fractional shift she caught, only because she had spent her life learning to read the faces of people who held power over her. Then he turned and walked back to the dais, and the hall resumed, and Seraphine stood in the corridor doorway, with heat still radiating from her arm where his hand had been, unable to explain what had just happened, and unable to stop herself from pressing that same arm briefly to her chest. She did not notice Lady Mira Vane watching from the far wall with an expression carved entirely from fear. The food arrived. It was not a servant's ration. It was a proper meal, packed in a covered iron dish that retained its heat, bread and roasted meat, and a small pot of herbed broth that smelled of thyme and wood smoke. Nessa found her in the corridor before she had finished half of it, and sat down next to her on the stone floor without asking, pulling her knees to her chest, watching Seraphine with round, careful eyes. "He touched you," Nessa said. "He steadied me. I had fallen." He left the dais, Seraphine. He was walking past. Alpha kings do not walk past fallen servants. They do not notice fallen servants. Nessa paused. He came off his throne, in the middle of the mating ball, for you. You are building a cathedral out of a doorway, Seraphine said. He was simply... I know what I saw. Nessa's voice was quiet now, certain in a way that made Seraphine uncomfortable. And I know what it means when a wolf reacts to someone the way he reacted to you. I am not high-ranked, but I know enough. Every wolf in that hall would have felt what he felt. The ones who were paying attention anyway. Seraphine put the lid back on the iron dish. What he felt was inconvenience. I caused a disruption. You do not believe that. She did not answer, because she could still feel the heat in her arm, still feel the gravity of it. She pressed her back against the cool stone wall and stared at the ceiling and told herself it was nothing. She told herself this with conviction. She had always been good at telling herself things that were not true when the truth was too dangerous to hold. 3 floors above her, Kyle Dravenmore sat on his throne and stared at nothing, and his wolf pressed against the inside of his ribs like something caged, restless and certain, pulling toward a direction that reason told him to refuse. 3 days passed. The court settled back into its rhythms. The elaborate political choreography of the mating ball week. See the dinners and ceremonies and formal introductions that would culminate in the Alpha King declaring his chosen Luna before the assembled packs. The council lords presided over each event with barely concealed satisfaction. The chosen Luna was already obvious to everyone who mattered. Princess Isolde of House Ashvane, daughter of the most powerful Alpha outside the Iron Throne, a union that would end a decade of political tension and seal the northern border against the encroaching Hollowlands. She was beautiful, composed, wolf-strong, and strategically perfect. She knew it. Her father knew it. The council knew it. Kyle Dravenmore said nothing to contradict any of it. He went through the required appearances. He permitted the formal introduction. He watched Princess Isolde perform the courtly rituals with flawless grace and felt his wolf go completely, unnervingly silent. Not satisfied, not resistant, simply absent, as though the creature within him had turned its face in another direction entirely and refused to engage. He noticed the gray-clad servant 3 more times that week, once in the garden corridor, carrying wood, once crossing the kitchen yard with a basket of linens twice her size, once at the edge of the morning meal hall, delivering trays with the same quiet efficiency and the same deliberate invisibility. Her dark hair pinned back, her eyes down, everything about her calibrated to avoid notice. He noticed her every time with a precision that irritated him, because she was clearly not noticing him back. And because his wolf surged each time with a certainty so absolute it bypassed every layer of reason and landed as fact. Her. Her. It is her. He said nothing. He did not act on it. He had responsibilities that predated instinct. On the 3rd evening, he overheard the argument by accident. He had returned early from the council meeting to walk the south corridor. He did this when the political weight of a room became too dense, when he needed stone and silence and air that was not thick with ambition. He heard the voices before he saw the source. A woman's voice, high and rigid with contempt, and a younger woman's voice, steadier but fraying at the edges. He stopped moving. He listened. You will stay in the kitchens for the remainder of the week. Lady Vane's voice. He recognized the name, a mid-rank house, minor nobles, their daughter, one of the parade of candidates who had been formally introduced and dismissed. You will not enter any hall where the Alpha King is present. You will not speak to any court member. You will be invisible. I am always invisible, the younger voice said. You have never needed to instruct me in it before. Do not mistake my patience for tolerance. A pause. I saw what happened at the ball. It must not happen again. I fell. He steadied me. It was nothing. It was not nothing. The venom in Lady Vane's voice was different now, older, more fundamental, something that had been living beneath her skin for years. Do you know why you have no wolf? Do you know why I have kept you in service, hidden, reduced, kept below notice all your life? Because if a single person in this court looks at you long enough, they will begin to ask questions I cannot afford to answer. And if the Alpha King's wolf has already... She stopped. He heard her breathe. Stay in the kitchens. A silence. Then, yes, my lady. He remained in the corridor long after the footsteps retreated in both directions. His wolf was not silent now. His wolf was at full alert, every instinct oriented toward understanding what he had just heard and reconstructing the architecture of what it implied. Lady Vane was afraid, not of embarrassment, something older and more fundamental than that. She was afraid of what would happen when someone looked at the wolfless girl long enough to see clearly. He went to find Elder Thessaly at dawn. The healer's chambers were in the eastern tower, always warm, always smelling of dried herbs and beeswax. Thessaly had served the Iron Throne for longer than Chaol had been alive. A small, silver-haired woman with eyes the color of weathered oak, who had the particular quality of people who have seen too much to be surprised by anything, but were still, somehow, capable of caring. He trusted her in the way he trusted very few living things, completely and without reservation. He did not explain the full conversation. He gave her only what he needed her to hear, a servant woman, wolfless, in the service of House Vane. An unusual restraint placed on her presence, a guardian with something to hide. Thessaly's expression changed, very slightly. He caught it. What do you know? He said. What do you suspect? She replied. They watched each other for a moment. Then Thessaly set down the herb she had been sorting and folded her hands in her lap, and said, with the careful precision of a woman choosing each word like a weapon, there are suppressants that can be bound into a child at birth. Ancient working, moon goddess craft, the kind that does not merely prevent a wolf from manifesting. It prevents the bloodline from being read at all. A wolf who encounters such a person senses only absence, emptiness, a human gap where a wolf should be. She paused. Unless the wolf is strong enough to sense beneath the suppression, unless the bond overrides the working, which can happen in very specific cases. What specific cases? Fated pairs, she said simply. The silence in the chamber was long. The family of the person suppressed would need to have a reason, he said. Yes, a significant reason. Thessaly's eyes moved to his face and stayed there with the patient, unflinching regard of a woman who had helped birth him and had no fear of him whatsoever. The bloodlines that attract suppression at birth are almost always bloodlines of unusual power. Lines the moon goddess has marked, lines that, unsuppressed, would be recognized on sight by any wolf of sufficient rank. She tilted her head. Would you like me to tell you which bloodline, specifically, produces the kind of power that an Alpha King's wolf would detect through a birth suppression? He already knew. He had known before he entered this room. He had known since he stood in the corridor and heard the fear in Lady Vane's voice. Find out what you can about House Vane's ward, he said. Do it quietly. Thessaly nodded. Then she said, Chaol, the wolf is not wrong. It has never been wrong about this. He left without answering. He walked back through the eastern corridor with his hands clasped behind him and his jaw tight, and his wolf pressing at the walls of him with a certainty he had spent 3 days trying to reason into silence, and failing. By the 4th morning, he had made a decision. Not about the princess, not about the council, about something smaller, something that, in the architecture of politics, was almost invisible. He sent for Lady Vane. She arrived in his receiving chamber, with her chin high and her composure immaculate, wearing the careful expression of a woman who has practiced for exactly this kind of meeting. He studied her for a moment without speaking, which he knew unsettled people and which he employed deliberately. "Your ward," he said. "The wolfless girl." Something moved behind Lady Vane's eyes, there and gone. "Seraphine, my king. She has been in my care since her parents' death, a charity case. She serves the house." "How long has she been in your care?" "Since infancy." "Her parents?" "Died in the plague of 17 years past. Common folk, my king, no rank." He noted the word common and what she had chosen to do with it. He noted the precision of her claim. No name, no pack, no history, nothing that could be verified against a bloodline record. He noted the way she held her hands in her lap, slightly too still. "She will be moved from kitchen work," he said. "She will serve the upper hall for the remainder of the ball week." Lady Vane's composure cracked, just barely, just for a second, like ice under pressure before it decides whether to hold or shatter. "My king, she is unranked. She is without Wolf. The upper hall." "Was not a request," he said. He watched her absorb it. He watched her recalibrate, retreat behind courtesy, fold herself back into the practiced shape of obedience. She bowed. She withdrew. The door closed behind her. He stood at the window and looked out at the training yard below. Wolves moving in their morning drills. The hard crack of wood and iron in the cold air. His breath fogging against the glass. And his wolf was very, very quiet now. Not absent. Satisfied. The particular stillness of an animal that has gotten what it wanted and is waiting, patient as stone, for what comes next. He did not intend to choose the princess over his fated mate. He knew this now with the same flat, absolute certainty with which he knew the sound of his own heartbeat. But he also knew that what was true and what was politically possible occupied entirely different territories, and the distance between them was measured in things that people like Seraphine paid for with their lives. He needed to know what Lady Vane had hidden before he could move. He needed to know before the council made the choice for him. He had until the last night of the ball. The upper hall was different at close range. Seraphine had served in the grand ballroom before, but only at the periphery, only with a tray and her invisibility. She had never served the high tables, the long iron-bound tables nearest the dais, where the alpha families sat, and the air was thick with wolf rank and the particular electricity of people who were accustomed to being the most powerful in every room. She moved carefully, precisely, the way she moved through everything. She kept her eyes on hands and goblets and the geometry of empty plates. She did not look at the dais. She felt the dais looking at her. She was aware of it from the moment she entered the hall. A warmth at her back, directional, specific, nothing like the ambient heat of the room. It moved when she moved. It found her between the tables as she navigated the crowded space and remained there, a constant quiet pressure between her shoulder blades. She did not look. She was very good at not looking. Nessa had asked her 3 times that morning why she had been reassigned. Seraphine had told her she did not know. Which was true. which was also, she suspected, not entirely true, in the way that things you do not let yourself think about are still true. Wolfless girl. The voice again. Cressida Thorne, seated at the second table, watching her with renewed attention, the kind that had recalibrated since the ball's opening night. I find it interesting that you have been moved to the upper hall. I serve where I am directed, my lady. And who directed you? Seraphine refilled the goblet in front of her and said nothing. Cressida leaned forward slightly. You should be careful, she said, and her voice had lost the public performance. It was quieter now, intimate in the way that threats sometimes are. There are women in this hall who have planned their entire lives around this week. They will not accept an obstacle from any quarter, particularly not one wearing gray. I am not an obstacle, Seraphine said. I am a servant. Then serve, Cressida said, and turned away. The heat at Seraphine's back intensified. She moved on. She was at the end of her circuit, at the far edge of the high tables, when she heard the footstep behind her. Not a servant's step, too deliberate, too slow, the footfall of someone not in a hurry because they did not need to hurry. She turned. The Alpha King stood 3 feet away. He was not wearing full ceremonial armor tonight. A heavy dark tunic, the same deep black, with the Iron Throne's crest at his collar. He held no goblet. He was simply standing there, looking at her, with that same expression she had catalogued at the ball, concentrated, considering, as though she was a problem he intended to understand. You were reassigned, he said. Yes, my king. Does the work suit you? She blinked. It was not the kind of question she was asked. It implied that it mattered whether the work suited her, which in her experience it never did. I serve well wherever I am placed, she said. My king. That is not what I asked. She looked at him then, properly looked, the way she had not allowed herself to do since the ball. Up close, the scar along his jaw was more visible. His eyes were not black as she had thought across the room, but a very dark gray, like iron in low light, with something in them that was either patience or its more dangerous cousin. The heat was immediate and overwhelming, even from 3 feet away. It lived in her chest and her arms and the back of her throat, and she had spent 4 days trying to convince herself she had imagined it, and she had not imagined it. It suits me, she said, quietly, truthfully. Something shifted in his expression, the smallest possible increment. He said, Good, and walked away. She stood for a moment with her tray in both hands and the heat resonating through her sternum like a struck bell, and she thought, I am in danger. Not the kind she had always known, not Lady Vane's cold contempt, not the casual cruelty of noble daughters, not the grinding arithmetic of starvation. Something different, something she did not have armor for, something she was entirely unprepared to survive. Across the room, Princess Isolde of House Ashvane watched the exchange from beneath her lashes with the flat, assessing gaze of a woman who had been raised to identify threats. Her fan stilled in her hand. Her smile remained precisely in place. At the far wall, Lady Mira Vane pressed herself back into the shadows, her face the color of old bone, and thought of a vial she had kept locked in a silver box for 17 years, and thought of whether she still had time to use it. Elder Thessaly sent him word the following afternoon, folded into a sealed document and delivered by her youngest apprentice with instructions that it be placed in his hands alone. He read it twice. Then he sat for a long time in his receiving room with the document on the table before him, and his wolf completely still, and something cold moving through his chest that was not the bond, and was not anger. Not yet. The records she had found were old, partial, reconstructed from archive fragments that someone had clearly attempted to remove and only partially succeeded. But they were enough. More than enough. Seraphine was not the orphaned daughter of common folk. She was the last surviving child of Aldrich and Marin Selene. Aldrich, who had been the moonkeeper of the old line, guardian of the ancient bloodline that predated even the Iron Throne. A line so sacred, so densely wound with the moon goddess's original covenant, that a woman born of it was not merely an Omega or an Alpha, but something older. A true Luna. The first in 4 generations. The suppression placed on her at birth was moon goddess craft of the highest order. It would have required a practitioner of significant skill. It had been requested, according to one surviving record fragment, by a woman named Mira Vane, who had paid for it with her family's entire reserve of moonstone. The record listed a reason that made his jaw lock when he read it: to prevent the child from being identified and claimed by any pack before House Vane could determine how to profit from the arrangement. 17 years. 17 years of starvation and servitude and suppression. 17 years of a true Luna kept below notice, kept wolfless, kept dependent and invisible, while her guardian calculated how to eventually sell what she had stolen. He set the document down. He rose from the table. His wolf was not still anymore. His wolf was pressing against the inside of his bones with a force that translated through his hands as a very slight, very controlled tremor, and he breathed through it once, twice, until the tremor stopped, because what he needed now was not fury. Fury was a blunt tool, and the situation required precision. He needed to move before Lady Vane did. He sent for 3 people: Thessaly, his head of security, and his beta. He spoke to each of them separately and briefly. By the time evening fell and the hall's candles were being lit for the final formal night, the arrangements were in place. He dressed for the ceremony with his attendant's help, permitted the armor and the ceremony chain, stood before his mirror, and looked at the face of a man about to do something that would permanently and publicly restructure the political landscape of the 9 packs, and found that he was not afraid of it. His wolf was calm for the first time in 5 days, certain, settled into its bones, ready. He went down to the grand hall. Seraphine had not been told about the final ceremony's significance. She knew it in the abstract. The Alpha King would choose, would announce, the hall would celebrate, the council would ratify, the 9 packs would have their Luna. She had spent the day in the upper kitchens preparing the celebration trays, her hands moving in their practiced rhythms, her mind carefully empty. Lady Vane had come to the kitchen once that afternoon. I had stood in the doorway and looked at her with an expression that Seraphine could not decode. Not the usual contempt, not the careful superiority. Something that looked almost like deliberation, like a woman standing at the edge of a choice she has not yet made. She had said nothing and left. Nessa had found her at the prep counter and said, low and urgent, "Something is happening tonight. I can feel it in the pack bond. The wolves are all tense. Not excited tense, alert tense." "The ceremony," Seraphine said. "It is an important announcement." "It is more than that." Nessa bit her lip. "Seraphine, if something happens tonight, if something changes, you trust yourself, all right? You trust what you know, even if what you know does not make sense to you yet." "That is a strange thing to say." "Promise me." Seraphine looked at her friend's face, round and earnest, and carrying the particular weight of someone who knows something she cannot yet say. She thought of the heat. She thought of the way the Alpha King had asked whether the work suited her. She thought of Lady Vane's fear in the corridor 4 nights ago. "I promise," she said. She carried her tray into the grand hall for the last time that evening as the ceremony was beginning. The hall was at full attendance. Every Alpha family, every council lord, every ranked wolf in the 9 packs packed into the great room in their finest, the chandeliers blazing above them, the iron walls polished to a glow. The energy was different than the opening ball. Tighter, more directed, so the anticipation of 100 wolves focused on the dais like a hand drawing into a fist. Princess Isolde stood at the base of the dais steps in a gown of silver and deep gold, her hair arranged with flawless precision, her expression composed and satisfied. Her father stood 5 paces behind her. The council lords were arranged to the right. The hall was waiting. Seraphine moved to the south wall. She put down her tray. She intended to remain there until the announcement was made and then return to the kitchens and not think about any of it. She intended to be invisible. The Alpha King descended from his throne. He did not stop at the base of the dais steps where Princess Isolde waited. He kept moving. The hall shifted, a collective, almost imperceptible reorientation, to 100 wolves turning by fractions toward the thing their instincts told them to track. Seraphine watched him cross the floor from the south wall. She watched the crowd part before him the way water parts before stone. She watched him come toward her and understood, in the moment before understanding became impossible to avoid, that he was not crossing to the other side of the room. He was crossing to her. He stopped in front of her. The grand hall of the Iron Throne went completely silent. The silence of 800 wolves when their Alpha King does something no living person expected. A silence that is also, at its deepest level, recognition. Pack bond recognition. The kind that travels faster than thought. Seraphine's voice had left her body. She looked up at him. His expression was the stillest she had seen it. Not cold, not commanding. Something else. Something that was holding itself very carefully in place because the alternative was overwhelming. He was close. The heat was enormous. It moved through her in waves, cresting and receding, and her bones felt like struck iron, and she could not speak. He reached out and took her hand. The contact was immediate and total. The heat she had felt in fragments since the ball became a single, continuous current. Not painful, not gentle. Something beyond both. A wave of sensation so complete she understood, in the wordless animal language beneath thought, that this was not proximity. This was not attraction. This was not anything she had words for, because she had lived her entire life without the vocabulary of wolves and mates and bonds and the ancient covenant of the moon goddess. And she was feeling all of it at once, and she could not have stepped away if the hall had been on fire. "She is mine," he said. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It carried to every corner of the room through the silence the way his voice always carried, with the particular gravity of someone accustomed to being the last word in every sentence. "This woman is my fated mate. I claim her before this court and before the moon goddess, by bond and blood and ancient right." The silence held for one moment longer. Then the hall erupted. Seraphine was aware of it at the edges. The voices, the gasps, yet the particular fractured note of Princess Isolde's composure breaking. The deeper sound of the council lords beginning to speak over one another. She was aware of Lady Vane somewhere in the room, could feel the direction of her panic, the way she had always felt the direction of threats. She was aware of Nessa somewhere nearby, vibrating with something she recognized as vindication, even across the room. She was aware of all of it, distantly, through a wall of sensation, because the Alpha King's hand was holding hers, and the bond was moving through both of them like a tide, and she was standing in the middle of the grand hall, being seen, clearly and completely, for the first time in her life. "You cannot claim a wolfless girl," one of the council lords said. He had pushed forward from the right, Lord Brennan Kalk, senior counsel, a heavy man with a lawyer's mouth and the political instinct of a siege weapon. "Ancient law requires a wolf-to-wolf claim. She carries no wolf. She is unranked. She is not eligible." "She carries no wolf that you can see," Thessaly said. She emerged from the crowd to the left, small, unhurried, carrying herself with the calm of a woman walking into a room she has entered 1,000 times before. She moved to stand near Seraphine, not blocking her, not speaking for her, simply present in the way of a person who has prepared for exactly this. "I have reviewed the old archives," Thessaly continued, addressing the council lord with the measured authority of a woman who has outlived 5 of them. "The girl has been under a birth suppression since infancy. A moon goddess working, commissioned and paid for by Lady Mira Vane 17 years ago. I have the record." She produced the document from her robe and held it up. She did not read it aloud, only held it so that the lord and those behind him could see it clearly. "The suppression masks her wolf and her bloodline both. The reason the Alpha King's bond reached through it is that the bond of a true Luna to her fated Alpha cannot be masked by any working made by mortal hands." The sound in the room changed again, not silence now, the lower, more dangerous register of a crowd reprocessing everything. "True Luna," Lord Kalk said. His voice had lost some of its certainty. "Of the Selene line?" Thessaly said. "Last surviving heir. Her parents were Aldrich and Marin Selene. I have documentation of the lineage as well, if the council requires it." Seraphine's hand, still held in the Alpha King's, had begun to shake. She was not crying. She did not know what she was doing. She was standing in the center of the known world being rebuilt, and she was trying to stay upright, while every piece of herself she had constructed on the foundation of being nobody, wolfless, unwanted, below notice. She was feeling all of it crack open, not painfully, but completely, the way ice cracks in spring when the water beneath it has finally found its own weight. She thought, my parents, their names. She had never known their names. The Alpha King turned to look at her. Not for the court, just at her. "Do you feel it?" he said, quiet, only for her. She looked at his face, at the iron-gray eyes and the scar along his jaw and the expression that had held itself carefully in place since he crossed the room and was now, barely, fractionally, beginning to become something else. She thought of 17 years of hunger and cold stone floors and the smell of Lady Vane's contempt. She thought of Nessa pressing a stolen bread roll into her hand. She thought of a heat she had felt through 3 feet of air and told herself was nothing. "Yes," she said, "since the first night." He did not smile, but his hand tightened around hers, and his wolf, which she could not yet feel and could not yet name, but which was already learning the language of her, pressed forward through the bond and recognized her in the way that only happens once, that cannot be faked or argued or suppressed, the way that is older than kingdoms and older than law and older than the fear of women like Mira Vane, who had spent 17 years burning resources to prevent this exact moment. "Lady Vane," the Alpha King said. He did not look away from Seraphine when he said it. He did not need to. You will remain in this hall. Lady Vane had been moving toward the far door with the controlled speed of a woman who has run from consequences before and knows the geometry of escape. Two of the Alpha King's guard stepped into her path. She stopped. Her composure was entirely gone now. She was white-faced, rigid, her hands moving slightly at her sides as though looking for something to hold on to. You have suppressed a true Luna bloodline, the Alpha King said. You have held an heir of the Selene line in servitude through deliberate deception, binding, and starvation. You will face the Council's judgment. His voice was still low, still absolute, still the voice of a man who does not need volume to make a thing inevitable. Whatever you believed you were protecting yourself from, it is here now, and it is done. Lady Vane looked at Seraphine. For a long, strange moment, the two of them looked at each other across the grand hall. The woman who had stolen 17 years and the girl who had survived them. And Seraphine waited to feel triumph or rage or the hot satisfaction of reversal, and found instead that what she felt was more complex and more human than any of those things. She felt the grief of it. She felt the particular weight of 17 years that could not be given back. She felt, beneath that, a quiet and steady fury that was not hot, but cold, the deep cold of a woman who has decided that this is the last time she will be afraid. She did not say anything to Lady Vane. She turned back to the Alpha King. The suppression, she said. Can it be removed? Yes, Thessaly said from her left. Tonight, if you choose it. The unbinding requires your consent and your blood. The moon goddess placed the original covenant in your bloodline. Only your will releases it. She thought about her wolf, the creature she had been told did not exist. The absence where something should have been. The hollow space she had stopped mourning before she had words for what mourning was. She thought about the heat in her arm and the bond in her chest, and the man standing beside her who had crossed 800 wolves on open ground to take her hand. Remove it, she said. The unbinding happened in the healer's chamber that night, with Thessaly's hands steady at her temples and the Alpha King standing outside the door because he had asked if she wanted him in the room, and she had said no. Not because she didn't want him near, but because she understood instinctively that this needed to be hers alone, her will, her choice, her blood on the unbinding cloth. Without the gravity of the bond pulling her toward him even in this, she needed to walk through this door as herself, not as a reaction. The pain was brief, a bright, surgical opening, like a cut that knows where it needs to be. And then, she had no language for it. She had grown up without the vocabulary. She had grown up being told there was nothing there, and now she understood that there had always been something there, always, locked and bound and waiting beneath the suppression's gray weight, and it came forward now not like a flood, but like a tide returning to its shore, certain and enormous and patient. The wolf within her rising through every limb and reaching upward toward the ceiling and toward the moon, which was directly overhead and flooding the narrow window with silver. And she understood in that moment, with the whole of her body, what it meant to have always belonged to something that had always belonged to her. She sat for a long time after Thessaly withdrew in the silver light, with her wolf settled in her chest like a second heartbeat. Then she rose and opened the door. Aran walked back into the world. He was in the corridor. He had not gone far. 10 feet from the door, standing with his back to the wall, arms crossed, looking at the opposite stones with the particular patience of a man who has trained himself not to pace. He turned when the door opened. His wolf responded before his face did. She felt it through the bond, a surge of recognition and relief, and something fierce, and she understood that his wolf had been waiting for exactly this, to meet hers, to confirm what it had known since the ball. She stopped in front of him. They looked at each other in the corridor light. "It is done," she said. "I know," he said. "I can feel it." She could feel his wolf the way she could feel the heat. Directional, certain, intelligent in the way of something ancient and loyal beyond reason. She had lived her entire life with absence where this should have been, and now she understood what everyone who had ever looked at her with pity for her wolflessness had actually been seeing, which was not emptiness, but suppression, not absence, but constraint, and she thought with a clarity she had not expected. "I am not less than them. I never was. I was contained." She thought of Cressida Thorne's laughter, of Lady Vane's rations, of 17 years of gray. She thought, never again. The hollow ones came 3 days later, which was either terrible timing or the kind of timing that the moon goddess arranges when she has a point to make. They came from the northern border. Not an army, not a wave of bodies, but something older and worse. A column of shadow, directionless and cold, that moved through the forest beyond the palace gates the way infection moves through a wound, silent and certain and multiplying at its edges. The watchwolves saw it first. Their alarm went through the pack bond before the sound of their voices did, and the palace was awake and armed in minutes. The council had no plan for this. The hollow ones were ancient, predating the current pack structure, predating the Iron Throne, predating most of what the 9 packs thought they understood about the world. They were the reason the moon goddess had originally commissioned the old line bloodlines. They were the reason true Lunas existed. Kale knew this by the time he was armored and standing at the palace's eastern gate with his betas assembled behind him and the shadow moving through the tree line 200 yards away. Thessaly had told him 3 nights ago, during a late-hour conversation that had been about many things at once. The hollow ones fed on wolf energy, on the bond between wolves, on pack force, on everything that made the 9 packs dangerous. Against them, conventional wolf strength was partly effective and mostly insufficient. Against a true Luna, however, against the full, undiluted power of the Selene bloodline unbound and claimed, they were nothing. He had not told Seraphine this. He was telling himself it was because she had not yet learned her power's scope. He was aware it was partly because the thought of her in the path of that shadow column made something in him that was not his wolf, and not logic, and not duty lock completely shut. She found him at the gate anyway. She was dressed for it, not ceremonial, not gray, wearing a dark riding cloak over leather that one of the betas had brought her when the alarm sounded, her dark hair loose. Her wolf was present in a way he could feel through the bond, even at 15 feet. Calm, not frightened. Oriented toward the tree line with the particular focus of a creature that understands its purpose. She looked at the shadow column moving at the forest's edge, and her expression was the same as when she had looked at Lady Vane in the grand hall. That deep cold, that steady fury, that absolute refusal. "You were not going to tell me," she said. "I was going to tell you after I had assessed." "I am the assessment," she said. "I am the reason they came now. They sense the unbinding. They sense the bloodline free." She turned to look at him. "I know what I am. I read the archive pages Thessaly left on the table, which I assume she left there deliberately." "She did," he said, after a moment. Then let me do what I am. The hollow ones reached the tree line's edge. The shadow had a quality he had always found wrong in ways he could not fully articulate. It did not move like darkness. It moved like intention, like something that had decided where it was going and could not be argued out of it. His wolves behind him were steady but tight, the pack bond vibrating with the particular frequency of wolves facing something that outranked their fear. Seraphine walked past him to the open gate. He moved immediately to her side. She glanced at him. "You do not need to—" "I know," he said. "I am here regardless." She looked at his face for a moment. Then she turned to the shadow. He did not know what it looked like from the outside. He knew what he felt through the bond. Her wolf rising, not slowly, but completely. The full weight of a bloodline 4 generations suppressed, finding its feet all at once, and the power of it moving outward from her like light moves from a source. Not dramatic, but total. Reaching through the cold air of the northern night to the shadow column at the tree line and simply asserting, naming. The way the moon goddess names things, which is to say, completely and without the possibility of argument. The hollow ones stopped. They held at the tree line for a moment that felt longer than it was. Then they contracted, like smoke and wind, like intention abandoned, like a tide accepting that the shore will not yield. They pulled back into the forest in silence, and the darkness they left behind was only darkness, and the cold of the night was only cold, and the forest beyond the palace gates was just a forest. His wolves behind him exhaled in a sound that was not quite speech, but was very clearly relief. Seraphine lowered her hands. She was breathing carefully, evenly, the way she had breathed the night she caught the goblet at the ball. Counting it out, managing what was too large to manage all at once. He moved to stand beside her and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that was not insufficient. No, and because his wolf was pressed against the bond in a wave of feeling that he needed a moment to contain before it became expression. "The bond needs to be completed," she said. Her voice was quiet, not fearful, factual. "I know. If the hollow ones return and the bond is incomplete, the bloodline power is unstable. Thessaly told me. She told me the same." She turned to look at him. In the moonlight, her face was the face he had been learning since the ball. Every expression she kept controlled. Every flicker of emotion she permitted only briefly. And he had the peculiar experience, which he had never had with any living person, of feeling that her face was also his face to some extent, that her expressions were partially legible to him because some part of him already knew them. "I need to choose this," she said, "not because of the threat, not because of the bloodline, because I choose it." "Yes," he said, "that is the only way I want it." She held his gaze. He waited. He had told her he was trying to give her time, and he had meant it, and he would wait now for however long she needed. Because the truth of the matter was that his wolf had been certain since the hall, and he himself had been certain since the corridor, and the only question remaining was whether she was ready to be certain too. "I feel it," she said. "I have felt it since the first night. I told you." "You did." "It is not the bond making me feel it," she said. "I felt it before I knew what the bond was. I felt it when you were just a man standing near a corridor doorway, steadying a servant who had fallen." "I know," he said. "I felt the same." She stepped toward him. The heat between them at close range was complete. Gravity made literal, the bond pulling like something tidal. She looked up at him. He waited. She reached up and touched the scar along his jaw, briefly, with 2 fingers. the particular touch of someone who has decided, and he understood in the full weight of everything, duty and instinct and choice, and the 17 years she had survived to stand here, that this was not a woman being claimed. This was a woman claiming. He bowed his head to her. He offered his neck, not in submission, but in the equal and ancient offering of a wolf to his Luna, the gesture that completed the circle. She understood it without being taught, because some knowledge lives in bloodlines and does not require instruction. She accepted it. The mark was completed under the open sky, with the moon overhead, and his wolves witnessing, and the forest quiet, and the bond expanding through both of them like water, finding its level. Not like lightning, not like injury, but like arrival. Like something that had always been true, being confirmed at last. The light that moved through her when the mark completed was visible from the palace walls. It was the Selene bloodline fully recognized, fully claimed, fully present in the world again after 17 years of darkness. Every wolf in the 9 packs felt it through the pack bond simultaneously, a pulse that said Luna, true Luna, found and claimed and here. The witnesses in the courtyard dropped to one knee without discussion, without ceremony, without anyone having to suggest it. They simply knew. The bond knew. The moon goddess knew. Seraphine stood in the moonlight with the mark on her skin and her wolf singing in every cell and the Alpha King's hand in hers, and she thought of Gray. She thought of stone floors and stolen bread rolls and the particular discipline of surviving beautifully. She thought of Nessa. She thought of her parents' names, Aldrich and Marin Selene, and she said them quietly to herself, the way you say the names of things you have been waiting a long time to be allowed to keep. Then she turned to face the palace and the gates and the court beyond them and the rest of her life. The council sat the following morning in emergency session. Lord Brennan Calk arrived with his notes and his political instincts and his intention to find a procedural lever that would reopen the question of the Alpha King's choice, which he had spent